Tonight, the Central Intelligence Agency is confident that a Russian hacking plot tried to influence the U.S. presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. The hacking did not affect the actual vote totals. Instead, it was centered on the leaking of embarrassing emails and a campaign of misinformation. Now, with 39 days to go before the president-elect takes the oath on the steps of the Capitol, Jeff Pegues looks at the case against Russia.
The evidence that the Russians were trying to influence the U.S. election dates back to mid-June when private emails, opposition research, and campaign information stolen from the Democratic National Committee appeared online. U.S. investigators said the Russians were to blame. Did their actions impact one candidate over another?
I would say that the actions definitely were more detrimental to one candidate than the other.
Adam Myers works for CrowdStrike, the cybersecurity firm that investigated the hack and that works closely with U.S. intelligence. What did you see?
Imagine, somebody breaks into a bank and they use some sort of special saw to cut through the safe. We found that saw as they were using it.
So you caught them in action?
We did.
Myers says the cyber attacks began with Russian-backed hackers he nicknamed Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear. The information they obtained was then passed on to WikiLeaks and others to make public. The hackers also gained access to some Republican files, but that information never became public. Even after being exposed, the hacks against Democrats continued. This is pretty bold. This is pretty brazen in a lot of ways.
It's very Russian.
What do you mean by that?
I don't think that the Russians are shy or would necessarily pull back after something like that happens. They're doing their thing.
One reason the CIA believes Russia was trying to tip the scales to Trump, they've used similar tactics to favor candidates before, most recently in the elections in Ukraine. Scott, no one is saying that the actual vote count in the U.S. was hacked.
Our Homeland Security correspondent, Jeff Pegues. Jeff,
there's the military helicopters. Don't know what in God's name they're doing. And there's the plane. Don't know why they're doing circles around us.
In Syria today, the Assad dictatorship, backed by Russia, has cornered the remaining rebel forces in the city of Aleppo. Aleppo was the rebels' biggest stronghold, and its fall may break the back of the rebellion that began more than 5 years ago. Deborah Patta is in Syria.
Even with near total control of Aleppo, the Syrian military sent bombs thundering down on the rebels still holding out. Thousands of civilians have been caught in the intense fighting as the war came closer with the constant shelling this past week. Aleppo's historic old city has now been reclaimed by the Syrian army. Among the rubble, some insights into how this war was fought.
This is a tunnel dug by opposition groups to reach the government-controlled western side and launch surprise attacks.
The rebels were outgunned and outnumbered. This Syrian soldier showed us how they fought back, the sandbags, the propaganda on the walls, and the improvised weapons. Before they started using cannons, he told us, They used these catapults. His words drowned out by his army's fighter jets overhead. This increasingly one-sided battle may be coming to an end. A bicycle, a sewing machine, a kitchen stool is what's left behind. The battle for Aleppo has stretched Syrian forces thin, so thin the regime lost track of Palmyra. The ancient city the government vowed they would never lose again is now back under ISIS control. With much fanfare earlier this year, the Syrian and Russian forces had declared ISIS would never come back. That lasted just 9 months.
The Syrian government might be on the verge of taking back Aleppo, but the recapture of Palmyra by ISIS is a major setback, Scott. Proof that reclaiming territory is hard, holding it harder still.
Deborah Patta for us tonight. Deborah, thank you.
It's just hard to believe that this is going on.
I think it's kind of ridiculous.
You got to sit down and talk about it before you file the lawsuits.
Every one of the Knightstown residents we found near the square said the same thing. They can't understand why one of their neighbors would sue their town over the annual Christmas display.
In my opinion, I think it's a little bit of disgrace, I think, to our town.
The ACLU filed the lawsuit against Knightstown on behalf of Joseph Tompkins, who lives there. The case documents show Tompkins takes issue with the cross at the top of the tree. It says Tompkins, quote, is forced to come into direct and unwelcome contact with the cross display every day, which has caused him irreparable harm.
A couple weeks ago, they had a crowd here. Everybody was here. They lit their tree. Everybody was fine with it. But now you got one person, out of everybody.
Mark Tompkins is related to Joseph Tompkins. Mark says he doesn't buy the claim that Joe has been harmed in any way by seeing the cross.
There's a church on every corner here. There's a church on every corner. Is he, offended by all the crosses?
The lawsuit does specify that Joe Tompkins doesn't want his taxes helping light and maintain a religious display on town property. A man who lives next to the display says they can solve that by giving Joe his money back.
I think we can find people in this town that can replace that 0.00% of the cent to give to him and not have to worry about it.
Everyone I spoke to says they support the town fighting this legal battle. And if the cross has to come down, Mark Tompkins has a solution for that too.
He can take it down, and I'll tell you what, I'll park this car here until Christmas Day with 3 crosses on it.
Well, up next, if you read BuzzFeed, you may have noticed a piece recently by Kate Arthur. She's a reporter there. And she wrote it about Chip and Joanna Gaines. They're the couple behind the popular HGTV show called Fixer Upper. The piece attacked them for their Christian faith, saying they were against gay marriage, or more precisely, their church is against same-sex marriage. The title of the piece, Chip and Joanna Gaines' Church, firmly against same-sex marriage. Well, Well, radio show host Tammy Bruce has written a lot about this story, and she joins us now. Tammy, it's great to see you.
Hey,
I was a little confused when I saw this piece. I don't watch the show or the channel. I know that they're big in the HGTV world, but they didn't seem maybe public enough figures to attack in BuzzFeed. What is this about?
Look, I think that people say that you learn about individuals when they're successful. For the left in the last 8 years, we've learned that they're fascists, right? And I think that what we're seeing now after a decade of cultural success, I think the left is now looking for a new tact. And of course, we've always seen it, Christians are the target in general, as we've seen with bakers that won't bake cakes for weddings, etc. But now, since gay marriage is the law of the land and Americans generally are open to more of a fluid dynamic culturally, the left needs to find some other thing to argue. And in this case, I think it's a portend of something very difficult, in that they now want Christians to preemptively prove that they pay allegiance to conforming and to secular society. It's a new attack on Christians to let them know that effectively you are guilty until proven innocent. The great news is here, Tucker, is that this attack failed. And I think that the election itself was a message about our rejecting of political correctness and the culture of intimidation. This couple had support from across the board. Their premiere in the midst of this smear had a record-breaking premiere. And I think Americans are saying, look, no matter who we are, enough is enough with the culture of intimidation, enough with attacking individuals because of their faith, especially coming from the gay community. As a gay woman, I find it outrageous that we're attacking people simply because of who they are.
Well, yeah, and it also seems like part of the left's relentless politicizing of everything. I mean, my first thought was, I've got my views, you have yours, they have theirs. What does that have to do with their HGTV show? But I also thought, kind of selective, considering their views, whether you agree with them or not, are not exactly out of the mainstream for sincere religious people, and they're not just Christians. So I think most imams, most Muslim imams would have roughly the same views. Sharia law prohibits homosexuality itself.
Right.
But they would never go after an imam over this.
Well, look, even in this case, it wasn't even about them. It was about their church and their pastor. And here was an argument that they were somehow supposed to prove and answer an Inquisition's questions about who they are and what they stand for. The fact is, I only care about the choice she makes for the backsplash with the houses that she's updating. I don't care what they think, and as a gay person, as an American, it's about individual liberty, individual freedom, and that's what this election was about. And I hope that Americans are standing up against bullies, and in this case, that means we have to stand up against the American left.
Well, that website particularly, which is really dishonest deeply.
Yeah.
Tammy, thanks a lot. You explained that better than anyone I've heard. Thanks a lot.